Welcome to another episode of Rootstrap Radio. You've asked me to bring on some industry disruptors, so I have, and I found someone that is the largest. I want to make sure I get this right. I believe George is the largest car dealer in the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means in a second here.
Definitely not the largest car dealer in the United States.
How do we phrase it?
I am the largest car dealer in the Bay Area.
Okay, largest car dealer in the Bay Area. We're going to dive into what that means exactly with Shift in a second. George Arison is an entrepreneur, founder and co-CEO of Shift, an online peer-to-peer marketplace that radically changes the experience of buying and selling a vehicle. Previously, George co-founded Taxi Magic, which I've actually used before, the first on-demand mobile transportation booking technology. He currently resides in Palo Alto with his husband, Robert, and their twins, Amelia and Luca. Welcome to the show, George, and thanks so much for having us at your office here.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for coming up.
So one of the first questions on my mind when I was coordinating getting you on the show with Hannah was this comment that she made about your philosophy or something you preach with your company, which is sometimes it's better to be second. What does that mean? And what does that mean for you and your business?
So in general, a lot of what I know about business is from experience, right? I think one of the things I realized about millennials, and this is not a negative thing about millennials, but this is how they are. They've grown up in the world of Google, and they think that everything can be answered by going to Google and asking a question, and then you get an answer. And so I think as a result of that, in that generation, experience is just kind of not as important in their mind, which I think is a big mistake. In my life, like everything I've learned has been in some way from experience. And a lot of what I'm doing as an entrepreneur now, hopefully is better because I learned from previous experiences to do things differently. I helped us start another company called Taxi Magic in 2007. We were really, really early. In 2007, BlackBerry was your primary
I had it on a BlackBerry.
Yeah, and we put an app on a BlackBerry, and even that idea of put an app on a BlackBerry was like total foreign concept.
So this was basically the first iteration of what we now are accustomed to, Uber and Lyft.
Correct.
This was on-demand transport through taxis.
Correct, yes. On-demand transport to taxis, the idea was, hey, why do you need to stay in the street like waving a car when you should be able to get a car to come to you in some other way? And literally your options in 2006 were you either call a taxi phone number, and this is what would happen. Like, okay, I've put in your request. If the car doesn't show up in 15 to 20 minutes, give us a call back, right? Like that's kind of the method for getting a taxi, and not like that long time ago.
No.
Alternative is you kind of flag a car down. And so our thought was, hey, why can't we use the mobile device, which is then a BlackBerry and some other devices, but primarily BlackBerry, to get a car to come to you and really replicate the system that they were using for dispatching taxis for this thing, right? We would literally take the order from the customer and then translate it into the dispatch system and put it into this as if the operator had done it. And the reason this ties to this question of like it's better to be second is that we were a little bit too early. Right? Like we were an innovator who invented something totally new and different. This idea of putting an app on a BlackBerry was total foreign concept, really, really early. We spent a ton of money building that technology. And then the iPhone came out, and a lot of what we had built was a total waste. And suddenly what was really foreign and new when we were doing it was actually a lot easier to do and was going to cost a lot less money to do. And so in some ways, we would have been better off had we waited for like 9 months and started building our product post the iPhone versus before the iPhone.
It was I feel like it was 24 months between when I remember using Taxi Magic and then Uber came out, and the branding was everybody's private luxury driver.
Yep.
I was 19 or 20. I was a club promoter in Hollywood. So Taxi Magic was phenomenal for our industry. And the only reason I had a BlackBerry was because that was my texting phone for VIPs and all that. But we promoted it within our industry for
No, and LA was a really good market for us. I mean, for us, the kind of 5 big markets were DC, Virginia area, Dallas, Texas, Chicago, LA, and San Francisco. And in those markets really took off really well. Part of it was driven by like, where did you find cab companies that were a little bit more forward thinking and were willing to work with you? Because a lot of the reason Taxi Magic didn't actually work as well as it ideally could have is that taxi companies were like, oh, it's not important, we'll continue doing what we're doing. And of course, 5 years later, Uber's eating their lunch and they're like, holy cow, what do we do? But, had they, I think, listened to us in 2008, maybe Uber might not even be around. If you look at Asia today, the dominant app outside of China is this thing called, I think, Grab taxi, right? And yes, Grab has Uber style and Lyft style, like random cars driving on it. But a huge component of Grab is taxi fleets. And the reason being, like, they started that business a few years after Taxi Magic. By then, Uber had already started to eat into the cab company's business in the United States. And so a lot of these Asian cab companies are like, holy cow, we actually need someone to help us have better technology. And Grab, even though it's a third party, is that technology for us. And so the kind of like the US cab companies never went through that. And as a result, they're all dying, right?
It's interesting. That is a really, they never modernized. Whereas like in Latin America, Uber is struggling in those markets.
Because cab companies
exactly. I go to Argentina and Uruguay every other month, and it goes through phases of working and then not working and creating this artificial scarcity with the demand, and then the Ubers cancel when they know your routes. It's a disaster. And you're starting to see Cabify type apps, experiences start to work because they're like, fuck. We don't want to deal with these guys. This is too small of a market anyway. Let's focus on Canada, States, and let's let these taxis just use technology.
Exactly. So I think that's sort of for us. Like, look, I learned a ton at Taxi Magic, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to say, hey, we invented XYZ, right? Which we did. But as a business, we probably would have done better had we been 9 months or 12 months behind where we were, and not invested all that money into a set of technology that then became obsolete within a year.
App Store
didn't exist.
2010?
No, it was early. I think 2008 there was an App Store. Right?
I mean, that's a little over a decade. I mean, it feels like we've had smartphones and apps for our entire life.
Nope, it's very short time. And I mean, now, the other amazing thing is now the App Store is actually a huge profit center for Apple. But when Steve Jobs launched it, he's like, I don't want to make any money on this. It's just a way for me to...
It's a publisher.
To create new products to be used on the phone where I'm making all the money. Now, I think when I first started, I'm like, no, that's actually not true. Like, the App Store is going to become a huge opportunity for making money, which is what has happened. But, in the beginning, that's not how people thought about it. And like, before the App Store, to put an app on a BlackBerry, this is what we would do. Like, you'd have to go to a link, then you'd like download from that link an app on your phone, but the app wouldn't work. Because then you had to go to your settings in the BlackBerry, and then within settings, you had to go through like 3 or 4 more areas and find the space which would enable an outside app to be allowed on the phone.
And you felt like you were hacking something.
Yeah. And like having, a random person understand what to do was like next to impossible, right?
Like load pack or unpack. Yeah.
And so all this was like really getting in the way of you starting a business, but you would build all this tech to like make people understand what to do. And then as soon as you had an app store, none of that was needed. So that's kind of where being early was not great.
And I'm sure you know this better than most in the Bay. We're seeing this with a lot of technologies with blockchain, AR. I mean, AR has been around for over 20 years, but the user experience still sucks. And it's not, it's not going mainstream in the next 12 to 24 months. And I love a lot of blockchain companies that are trying to fix supply chain, but something that I recently did a video on, because my job is the content millennial kid. I got to figure out what's going to go viral, what sticks. So I did a short video on TikTok about why I'm not excited about cryptocurrency. I think non-fungible tokens, the actual blockchain is far more interesting. But I don't feel like there's anything broken right now. Venmo is working, Zelle works, all these things work. I had theft on my account recently. They refunded everything. That's not going to happen on blockchain. And I never saw such an explosion of predominantly blockchain trolls just start to go, wow, this makes a lot of sense. These are the guys on Reddit going, okay, we don't like what this guy has to say, but we kind of agree with him. So it's interesting when that timing happens, because it's all about timing.
Yep, and mobile, for us, like we basically saw that mobile as an opportunity, but we're a little too early, and we should have waited. And obviously, like Uber came in at a better time. And I actually think, to be honest, the really big innovator in the space is Lyft, right? That's another thing that everyone forgets about the kind of mobility
Tell
world.
us about that.
So Uber was doing for black cars what Taxi Magic was doing for taxis, right? Enable existing fleets of black cars to be able to have easier bookings from consumers. And that was very expensive for people, and so a bunch of people were using it. It's a great product, but like it wouldn't be as mass consumption of a product as Uber and Lyft are today.
Right.
Then Lyft came in and said, screw the idea of a licensed driver. any random person should be able to get into a vehicle and drive around, right? And I so distinctly remember my best friend from college who had studied Taxi Magic with me and then is now my co-CEO here at Shift, was visiting me in San Francisco. We were in front of Buy Right Ice Cream, and this like totally random, really rundown car stopped. Somebody like got into it, put their bags into the trunk, and was going to the airport. And Toby's like, how is that not a taxi? Of course it's a taxi. You know, we had a Lyft sign, like a Lyft mustache on it or whatever. And so like that innovation of like saying, forget about licensed driver, anybody can do this, really changed the game because suddenly supply like spiked massively. And if you remember in the early days, Lyft wasn't actually charging you. It was all donation based, which was a way to get around kind of regulations. And I think that was a really incredible innovation on part of the founders of Lyft because that changed the equation of what was possible. Now, Uber then saw this happening and saw the explosion of Lyft in San Francisco and LA and realized that they had to copy it and do the same thing. And so I think that's when like Travis really did something very gutsy and that most founders are not willing to do or most CEOs aren't willing to do, which is to cannibalize their existing business. So he launched UberX, which inevitably was going to cannibalize Uber, the black car business, which was financially profitable business because it was so expensive. But the opportunity for growth was a lot greater with UberX. And because they already had operations in so many markets, it was easier for them to launch UberX in all the markets where they had Uber Black. Whereas for Lyft, they didn't have operations in a lot of markets and they had to kind of go to it from scratch. But in practice, the innovator was Lyft and then Uber was the one that won.
They had the infrastructure, they could spin off business units like Uber Eats.
Yep.
I remember at one point they were trying to create the B2B platform where if you wanted to create, because for us, we build apps. So naturally, when Uber exploded, 20 inbounds a week is, I want to build Uber for this. Yeah. So somebody was listening and they said, okay, well, let's just give these people a software development kit and a platform to allow them to do that. I don't know if it went anywhere, but they certainly...
There have been a few of those. I don't know if other companies have done that as well, right? And that's really tough.
Yeah, it's tough because you also if you're going to be taking investment money, you need to host it on your own infrastructure.
Yeah, and also just like, building on somebody else's infrastructure limits what you can do, and then everyone wants to do it differently, and that kind of gets complicated.
Is there Uber in Georgia?
So in Georgia, there is Cabify, I think it's called.
Yeah, it's Estonian company.
Yeah, exactly. I think they have I think it's called Bold now or something, but it used to be Cabify. So that's the company that's kind of really dominant there. But in Georgia, the idea of an unlicensed taxi driver has been around for a long time, right? Ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, I think a third of the male population became taxi drivers as a way of making money. Obviously, like only a little bit. And so they're actually now trying to do the opposite, which is reel back and have a little bit more control over the system. But Cabify is amazing. Like
it is
super cheap.
Yep.
Really high quality drivers. In Georgia, at least, it's all Priuses, so the cars are really good as well, and it works really, really well. But when I would go to Georgia until Cabify came in, which was roughly 2018-ish, I would never get into a taxi because I was always afraid of what might happen, and I would have to have like a driver kind of drive me around out of risk mitigation.
Sure.
But with Cabify, you feel totally safe in kind of getting in.
So I've been really impressed with how Georgia is always able to fight or punch above its weight class in terms of having neighboring enemies, cuisine, culture, lots of independence from Russia. I went to school with a lot of Georgians in Silver City.
Wow.
And Russians and Georgians, and I would come home, and I was 7th grade. Понимаешь по-грузински, по-русски. My mom, what the fuck? You went to French school. Why are you learning Russian? I go, Skviti really, Victoria, I have all these Russian friends. I don't know why, but there was some attraction to this French immersion school that I went to because my dad's French. So I started learning a lot about the culture, and it was always really amazed. And, they bring their lunches to school, so I always got a little taste of that.
Well, Georgians are good at relationships, that's actually how they manage to punch above a weight.
Business.
It's building relationships is a really big thing in that country.
Are you pretty close to the startup scene and the technology community?
I would say moderately close. The startup scene is pretty small and very early days, right? And there are a lot of attempts to have startups, but nothing's been super successful yet. I did help a Georgian company that had some really cool tech in AI for customer communication. Actually transitioned to become a US-based company. They raised capital here now, and so we've done, like, that's one thing that's happened, and that's really big. That's the first time a Georgian company has raised capital abroad. It was a really cool thing. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, and in weird ways, like one awesome success story, and this company's still early, like it needs 5 years to get to that, will then breed a lot of other stuff, right? Because suddenly it becomes like an ecosystem and you can build on that. One of the good things about Georgian startup ecosystem is that the government's extremely supportive. So they are actually helping fund companies through this match and grant program where they give you $250,000 if you raise $250,000. So that's really awesome. And then there's just a couple guys, like one American, one Georgian. The American lives in Georgia, married to a Georgian. They started a chapter of Startup Grind, which is like exploded. So they just hosted this huge conference in November in Georgia where like 2,000 people from all over the former Soviet Union came to this event, which was also really awesome for Georgia to do. So I think there's like stuff happening, but it's still early days. Like,
well, if there's one person who's repping it and being their ambassador when the right startup's going to explode on the market, I think it's you, right?
Well, that's sort of kind of what they want me to do. I mean, we'll see. Like, look, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Georgia as far as like my personal career, because after college, like I went all in on Georgia in terms of what I wanted to do. I, spent about 2 years in politics in the U.S., kind of helping build momentum for democratic elections in Georgia with U.S. Government's help, kind of providing, analysis and data for politicians for what to do. Then I went back to Georgia and ran a political campaign there with one of the main opposition political parties. That went okay, but like the party that won was extremely undemocratic and not an ideal group to have in office. And then they were in office for like 11 years doing really horrible things. And when that happened, I became kind of depressed. And so I actually said, okay, I'm going to stop being involved. I wrote a book about Georgia, published it in the US, and then didn't touch Georgia for a long time. It was kind of tough. The other piece of it is like, I know I'm gay, and it's a complicated relationship in that regard as well. But then like in the last, when I was starting Shift, we needed to find a place to set up, kind of operational labor, which was inexpensive. And obviously, like logical thing would be, okay, I'm going to do it in India or Philippines or something. But I felt this like, okay, here's an opportunity for me to give back. And so we actually set up a team in Georgia.
Amazing.
So the very first person I hired, when there was nobody, just me, was a woman I knew in Georgia. She's still with Shift. It's been now, in her case, 6 years, and she has a team of 80 people working for her or with her in Georgia.
And are you still utilizing them for operations?
Yeah, we use them for operations for Shift. So it's basically like, in effect, our version of like outsourcing of anything manual. So like they reply to customer service emails. They post, like when you go to our website and you see our cars, they post those cars on our site from the photos, and do a lot of those types of things. Anytime, like we have an algorithm that prices our cars. 90% of the time we do that electronically because we can like know the answer, but sometimes we don't. And there's an escalation that goes to them. So it's been really awesome to have this team there, which like works super hard, is extremely inexpensive for us compared to other places. And, I feel really good about the fact that, hey, I did this, to give back to Georgia, and it's also helped the business a lot.
Do they have to interface much with the U.S.?
Yeah. So they work 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. In 12-hour shifts, 3 days a week. So that's kind of the rotation, and they work 7 days a week, meaning like there's always somebody there. There's a lot of interconnection with the team here as a result.
And how has been the democratic government been in the last?
So an incredible thing happened in Georgia in 2012, which you'd never expect to happen. So a very wealthy Georgian man named Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is worth like, Forbes says he's worth like $5 billion. Probably in practice, he's actually worth like 10 to 15. He had made all his money in Russia. And then when Putin became president, he actually like sold everything he had in Russia and left. So now all his money is in like Western companies, and very clean as a result of that. So he was just kind of living for himself in Georgia for years, build a massive kind of palace that overlooks the city, the capital city, and has a ton of people living from donations that he makes to people. Like, by some estimates, like 500,000 people in Georgia live off salaries or benefits that he gives to various people in the country. And so he was like totally not involved in politics at all. And then the old Georgian government really went after him and basically wanted him to pay bribes in very large amounts. And he's like, screw this. Created a political party, hired, I think, every single lobbyist that you could hire in Washington, which gave him incredible insulation from being able to be touched because America is very powerful in Georgia.
Sure.
And started 2 different TV stations. And within a year, we had an election and he won.
Wow.
And won like overwhelmingly. So this is 2012. Then he became prime minister for a year. And then he did something even more remarkable, which never happens in the Soviet Union. He's like, I'm now leaving office. And he just retired. And he still is kind of head of the political party that now runs Georgia, but he doesn't run the government itself. And his method has been to, like, every 12 to 36 months, he'll replace the prime minister. Because as soon as he feels like the prime minister is becoming a little bit not clean.
Taking a little too much power.
So it's actually like been really interesting because it's reduced corruption dramatically.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, with a country that small, are you able to defend yourself up against corruption a lot easier than?
Well, Georgia used to be very corrupt. I think it's not as corrupt now. I mean, of course, there's still corruption. Like,
Sure.
let's not kid ourselves. But it's very easy to start a business now, and you have no fear that if I start a business, the government's going to come after me.
Right.
Whereas in 2008, like, good luck if you want to start a business.
And there's, because of, globalization in the market, they're not dependent on just selling products to Russia. They're probably selling to Asia, to
I
the
mean,
States.
so post-Soviet is still the primary thing, sadly. Yes, I think like Georgia sells, $200 million worth of goods to the U.S., but it's pretty minor. Turkey is actually a huge trading partner as well. So one of the biggest risks on Georgia is kind of, instability in Turkey. Like whenever there's instability in Turkey or the Turkish currency, has inflation, et cetera, that really impacts Georgia dramatically because Georgians do trade a lot with Russia, but there's kind of Turkey is viewed as less of an evil place to be involved in for obvious reasons because they haven't taken over 20% of your population or your territory. And so Turkish instability really hurts Georgia. But look, I think there's a lot of opportunity. The amazing has been that in the last 5 or so years, you've seen incredible growth in the tourism industry. And so the number of tourists has just ballooned out of control. There are now dozens of flights that go into Georgia a day from Western European countries, and they're always full. Which is incredible, right? And so a lot of East Europeans go to Georgia, the same way that West Europeans go to East Europe.
It's like a party spot in summer months too. So.
Exactly, and hiking is a big thing now too. And so it's been really interesting to see kind of all this tourism come in. So you're seeing a lot of hotels are going up, a lot of bars, a lot of restaurants. That world is really growing. What Georgia does not have is real industry. And another really funny or random thing is that it's a huge blockchain-focused country. So something like 20% of all crypto mining happens out of servers in Georgia or something like that.
Energy is a lot cheaper?
Energy is really cheap, and the government encourages it, partly because Ivanishvili is actually one of the whales in crypto.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the country in the Baltics, I didn't know about Georgia, really embracing the blockchain to fix voting and...
Yep. And some of the tech, in Georgia, there are these kiosks in the street. You can walk up to the kiosk, you type in, say, your account number for your electricity, and then you can pay on that kiosk.
Really?
Now, you can't do that in the U.S., right? It's actually complicated to send your electricity bill payment. It's easier to do that over there than it is over here.
And you recently got your U.S. citizenship, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been waiting for a while.
What was that process like?
Well, in the last 7 years, it's actually been pretty simple, right? I got my green card. After I joined Google, I was able to get my green card. This is in 2012, and then, you wait some time period and you become a citizen. And it's been pretty smooth, other than the fact that, I don't know why it would take 13 months to process an application for citizenship once you've already been approved for a green card. So after you have a green card for 5 years, then you apply to become a citizen, and you wait for 13 months to become a citizen. And you're like, why does that take that long? I don't know. It shouldn't take that long. But it does, especially because the USCIS is actually a self-funded entity, meaning you pay fees to USCIS, and those fees are what operate the business. So it's not like taxpayer dollars are not supporting it. So I'm like, hey, charge higher fees, move faster, right? It would be a logical thing to do if I was a business person. But the process was really smooth, and people are wonderful in terms of being supportive. And it's when my husband and I, when we went for my interview, because he just came with me to watch, like you sit there and you see these like people with, basically every major Silicon Valley tech company badge waiting in line.
Yeah.
And you're like, and my husband's joke is like, why are we making these people wait? Just let them all in today, right? Like that should be the thing. But anyway, so it was really good. Before that, it was pretty complicated. Like I've written about this, and it's very long to describe. But our immigration system is not set up to encourage people with high skills to be in the country, and that's, I think, a really big miss, because there is such a desire from people who create and who produce great technology or other things to be in the U.S., because this is still the fundamentally place where you want to be, and it'd be ideal if we could align our immigration system to encourage those folks to be there. Right?
What do you think it's doing to the talent market in SF?
Well, so I've always viewed my willingness to kind of battle immigration rules, so to say, or live by them, but being willing to like take advantage of the opportunities, even though they're a lot of work to manage and legal costs, et cetera, to be a huge advantage for hiring. And so like we've, from day one, we always said, yes, we'll sponsor people for H-1B visas, for example, or we'll take people on optional practical training from college. We've sponsored you for a green card, quickly, rather than waiting for a long time, like some companies might. So that's been a big advantage for us in terms of hiring. Some of the best people we've hired over the life of the company have had immigration requirements. And a lot of founders would be like, I can't touch this. Like,
right.
It's not worth it for me to spend $10,000 getting your H-1B, et cetera. And my theory was like, if this person's really, really good, it's actually worth spending that money to have the H-1B versus not. And so it's been a huge competitive advantage for us.
And I'm sure coming from Google, you experienced that firsthand. Google has extended a lot of
H-1Bs. Google's amazing at this. I mean, that's actually a big reason why I went to work there, is because they're really good at managing immigration. And so my thing has been like, obviously I can't be as good as Google, but like we can be as good as a startup can be, and it's been a huge competitive advantage. There are so many great engineers, I think, who'd love to be in San Francisco that we can have in San Francisco, because you cannot get visas for them. And I'm sorry, but it's idiotic, because the costs are going up and are kind of unsustainable in terms of what it costs to hire talent in San Francisco. And so we should want more people here to produce great stuff.
I think the problem is just incentives too, where we're not developing talent in the right way, in my opinion, in the States, where you've come from finance, you got burned in 2008, you moved to San Francisco, you go become a dev boot camp React guy overnight. I'm sure you get a lot of those inbounds.
Yep.
You're like, I can get someone in Georgia who has been studying software programming for 10 years for a fraction of the cost of the General Assembly or dev boot camp guy who wants 150 grand.
Or, well, the other guy wants 150 grand. The Georgian guy's happy with 15,000.
Exactly. So to me, companies can't and shouldn't have to be put into a certain bucket.
No, I mean, the reality, like, look, I moved to the Bay Area, when I joined Google, in large part because I knew I wanted to start another company, and I wanted to start that company in the Bay Area. Because Taxi Magic was founded on the East Coast, and for all the mistakes that we made, geography also was a mistake, because we would have done better, I think, had we been here. Like, we would have built better relationships, we would have done more correct steps to be more successful. And I kind of got that really quickly, early on. And so I'm like, the next company I'm going to do on the West Coast. And still, like, I have a really hard time supporting founders who are not based in the SF area as an investor, right? If they come to me and ask me for a small check, I'm like, I really want to, but I just know how hard it is to build a company.
It's the Mecca.
And you're like making your life 10 times harder because you're somewhere else.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you can't build great companies, by the way, in Ohio or
or you
Idaho.
You have distributed teams elsewhere, but you got to have boots on the ground.
It's just really, it's just a lot harder. And so I admire people who are in Idaho even more that they're doing it there. That said, from my perspective, like, every great company that's going to get started now will need to figure out how to build teams somewhere else day one.
Yeah.
Shift, like, we open our outside team in DC, where we have an engineering team, in 2016. So about 2.5 years into the life of the company, or 3 years into the life of the company. I think that if I was redoing Shift, I would have started with engineers both here and somewhere else. Because one of the biggest problems for Shift in the early days was we didn't have enough engineers, and we didn't kind of feel comfortable opening an office somewhere else, and that was a mistake, because we'd have scaled engineers faster and produced more product and been in a better place from day one.
Well, I think we get all we surrender to the pressures, whether it's an outside board, it's investors, it's cultural stuff we're reading online, where you have to have everybody on site, you have to build this amazing culture. And the reality is, in 2020, culture's on Slack. Like it's everywhere.
Well,
I think it's important to do annual offsites and bring everyone together.
Interestingly, a lot of my shareholders now actually say that their LPs, right? Because most of my shareholders are VC, so their LPs are actually pushing them to fund more companies that have teams outside of San Francisco. Because LPs are feeling like, hey, we're wasting money, right?
Focus on profits. We want
by hiring people who for $250 a year when they really shouldn't have to make $250 a year, and you can hire that person in Montana for $125. That means I'm wasting $125,000.
Exactly.
And probably not only that, I'm actually not getting as good productivity because the person in San Francisco has 5 other job options, so he might not feel like he needs to work as hard. Whereas the person in Montana, that's such an amazing job for him that he'll work a lot harder, right? I'm not saying it's everybody, but as a general rule, it's kind of possibility.
I would even argue his mental health would be a lot stronger in a market where his dollar is going a lot further.
Totally. And so I think that we're gonna. I mean, in some ways this is good, right? Because one of the things I get really frustrated by is this massive disparity between incredible innovation that's happening on the coast and lack of that innovation happening in the inner part of the country. And so the cost pressures that the coasts are facing might actually force us to bring a lot more innovation into the rest of the country, and I think that would be really good because I'm a really big believer in America, but I don't think we can live in a world in which California and New York and I don't know, DC are prospering and Kansas City is not.
No, I agree, and that's I think about that all the time. Where we've got 120 people outside of the United States, in Uruguay and Argentina, and as much as I love that, it's been such a nightmare challenge for 10 years dealing with government bureaucracy and so much logistical stuff. Where if I would do it over again, I probably would first start in Montana, in Tallahassee, in one of these communities where you're getting talents from the Oracle, from PwC, hungry consultant talent, and you're not having to pay the premiums anymore.
And we had an engineer recently who's a great engineer. He's been with us for a very long time, I think 4+ years now. And last summer, he's like, I want to move to the Midwest. He actually hadn't picked where he wants to move. He's like, I'm going to go look at 4 or 5 cities, live in them for like 2 months at a time with my girlfriend, and then we'll decide where to settle. And so they've settled in one of the Midwestern states. I won't say where, just because I don't want to say who he is. I don't want to out him. But like for us, that was like a huge opportunity because they're like, hey, do we like, and we want to keep you, right? So like
sales guys, marketing. I mean,
but like, do we build a team around you where like you have more engineers? Because once you have a really strong lead from who has been with you for that long, it's actually easy to bring more people on board. So that's been like a big topic of discussion where like we already have one team, in DC, and that's been an amazing thing. Like I had so many debates with our leadership on the technology side about whether to do this DC thing or not, and I kind of like just like pushed it through. And now everyone's like, yeah, it was like a really smart thing to do because the team's actually very strong and very, very productive. And whereas like if we get 1 in 3 offers that we make in the Bay Area to say yes, that's amazing. In DC, I think our acceptance is like 85 or 90%.
Oh wow!
Because again, there's not a lot of opportunities like this over there.
Government and
it's like you have a Silicon Valley startup that's well funded, with a big team in DC, so you're not just like a one-person thing, but like you're actually part of a whole. That's not common, right, over there, and so that's and it's still early in the life of the company. So that's a great opportunity for people, and that's why our close rates are so high, and the productivity of the team is really, really good, and you don't feel like they're gonna, be constantly under pressure to go somewhere else because they're getting 10 other offers at the same time, like it's here, and so I've been really impressed by that, and like I think more of that is going to be the case as companies scale rather than less.
Tell me about co-CEOs. I've been always interested in that topic. What's that like?
Well, so my best friend, Toby Russell, who I've known since the first day of college, right, so it's a very long time, and he's like basically like my brother. and I are kind of splitting the job, let's say. Some of this has to do with just unique circumstances of how we work and together, and some of this has to do with what Shift needs. Shift is a pretty complex business with lots of internal operational requirements and also fairly large capital requirements as well. There are things that I do really well. I do a fairly good job kind of being the face of the company externally and raising capital. I think I do a reasonably good job in setting strategy and kind of what we need to do. That takes a lot of time, and there's not as much time to then spend on like, hey, actually making sure the business is run the way you want to. And Toby prefers to focus on those things. Like I like being in investor meetings and pitching Shift, and I think Toby would prefer not to be in investor meetings and pitching Shift. He'll do it if he has to, but like that's not the thing he gets a lot of energy from. But I think like working with a team here and helping them be very successful gives them a lot of energy. So it's kind of how we split things. I think the general look, most of the time this doesn't work. Sometimes it does. I think important things are you got to really split lanes like very clearly and distinctly as much as possible, and you need to be able to have the ability to reach resolution on things which are in both persons' lanes, right? Like as much as you split lanes, some things are going to come together. Like for example, budget, right? Like you can't have one or the other on the budget because a budget impacts both of your lanes, even in the division that I just outlined. And so you need to have the ability to manage that. And I think that's kind of the hard thing always, no matter how close you are. Like how do you kind of resolve those types of things? And we have a process for that, and we work with our coach on how to make it happen. But I think overall, for Shift, this has been really valuable because I think we would not have been able to get through the period when we've done this for the last like 3 years or so without both of us being here and making this company be successful.
And you mentioned you guys have a coach.
Yeah.
How's that process been?
I love my coach, and I tell founders.
And you share the same one?
We have the same coach, yeah. Okay. I mean, we have individual relationships with coach, and then we also actually meet with the coach together as well. Our coach is a guy named Jeff Hunter. He is a founder of an organization called Talentism. It's a very data-driven approach to kind of helping people understand what their pitfalls are and how to address them. And it's a very kind of concept of focusing on clarity. So like the general thesis of his work is that most teams and most organizations are confused. And the job of a leader is to bring clarity to that confusion and help people focus on the right stuff.
Most of the time we step into these companies it sounds like you guys had a lot more experience than most founders when starting the company. So you knew which lane you were choosing. You had a very strategic decision or intention of why you were going to be co-CEOs. But in most cases, when you hear the garage startup, they just choose a title. And it's 9 times out of 10 the wrong title. You're actually not the COO, and you're not really the CFO. And it's a very awkward phase that I think every business goes through. We went through that where everybody, including myself, was in the wrong role, and I had to step down as CEO, and that was weird. And now I'm like, wow, they don't teach in business school. Seeing those sometimes sucks. Yeah,
and I think, look, I generally don't like titles actually. So my big thing is like try to not have titles at an early stage as much as possible. Like we still only have right now, I think, 2 VPs at Shift, one in sales and one for engineering, and we might have a couple more soon, but like it's been
But employees like titles. You may not.
Yes.
But for them, career path, it's huge.
It's a big thing. And like what I always tell people, look, we're going to have fairly kind of low title levels internally, but we have to have clarity on what you're owning, but it doesn't have to be a big title. I don't care what title you use externally when you're like, if you leave and you want to get a job somewhere else, and if you are not lying about what you did, I'll always verify that. But like, internally, I don't like having titles at all. And as now, look, we're big enough now, I think we need more titles a little bit. And so like we recently have established director titles, which we didn't have for a long time either. And now we have like a few directors of certain areas, which has been a new thing for us. But I think, like, yes, we were very thoughtful about it. And I think we were more thoughtful about it kind of halfway through Shift's life in terms of how to do things. And our coach, for me at least, has been really helpful because I, at least, and I think most founders have a lot of blind spots.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not realistic to say, hey, I'm going to change my blind spots or I'm going to like fix them. That's really tough to do when you're in a high stress environment like you are building a company. But at least you can say, I know what my blind spots are. I can warn people about them before they start working with me or when I'm in a meeting, et cetera. And thirdly, I can hire people who are good at catching my blind spots and ensure that I don't fully kind of fall off the cliff as a result of that. So as an example, like one of my blind spots is I will push through and make what I want to happen no matter what, but I lose sight of what the second order impact of that thing might be, right? Like it's kind of like I'm digging a hole through a mountain, and I don't think about the fact that the whole mountain might collapse if I like push too hard or dig too big of a hole. And having somebody like, hey, don't do that, like is really helpful. And so a lot of usually founders have some really big strengths and like really big pitfalls, and coaching I think has been really helpful for me.
It's changed my life. And we have two guys that the four of us share, and we've chosen the one that has more compatibility with our personalities. And it's fascinating having someone holistically give you business advice, not being CC, not in Slack, not in the weeds of everything, and help you identify those blind spots. And my coach is one's 68, the other one's 86, and he was the president of IBM. Like this guy is, he's a genie. He's a total like. He understands what's coming, before it comes. So that has been, probably one of the most powerful things that's changed our relationship, because it's very difficult, the partner side. And
So I tell all the founders now that I meet, I'm like, hey guys, get a coach right away.
Yeah. So what's next for Shift? Like, what's on the horizon?
Well, we've always said we want to build a company that can go be a public company. Doesn't mean it has to be a public company, but we want to build a company towards IPO, right? So for example, we've done audits now for 2 years. We're doing our third audit now. Like most companies, our stage might not do that, but we felt it was important to have accounting capabilities and finance capabilities that are necessary.
And when you say audit, it's
like audited financials.
Yeah, so it's a valuation prep for if you want to go IPO one day.
Oh, it's not so much valuation, but like how did you spend the money?
Got it.
Are your financials actually exactly what you actually spend the money on, right? Because financials are very much self-reported almost, and so then you hire auditors like Deloitte or PwC to come in and like actually audit your books and say, yeah, this is actually correct. You're representing your financials in the correct way, and that's a very expensive and complex process to do. When we did it for the 2017 financials, like it was a ton of work for our finance team, and most companies at our stage at that point would have been like, hey, I'm going to deal with this in 2 or 3 years. We are like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to like do that right away because we're kind of building a company towards IPO. That's our belief. And so, and the good news is that in our space, in our company, Carvana, which is a very interesting business, different model than ours, but analogous to us, has gone public and has a very good run as a public company. So we kind of have a little bit of a guiding post of like, hey, you need to do these things to be a public company in this space. And so we're kind of pushing towards that. Our revenue, we need to be like roughly 1.5x our revenue or 2x our revenue for 2019 to be a public company. So that's a really big focus for us. Is like, hey, grow revenue. And you can do that in 2 ways, right? One, you could either launch a ton of new markets, because actually it's still only in like roughly 5 large regions. That's roughly 15 cities or so. So we could launch a ton more markets and kind of skim off the top, or we could push to go deeper into gaining market share in the markets we're in. The latter is kind of where we've put our focus because we think that's a better approach to using our capital and building a sustainable business over the long term. And so that's sort of our next big thing is like gain more market share in the markets we're in, while concurrently launching a couple markets, but not like going on a tear and launching 10, 20, 30. That's different from how I thought about things in the early days of Shift. I thought we'd be like in 100 markets by now. But I think as you kind of do this business and learn how complex the logistics of it is, doing deeper in each market is better.
You said a couple of things that have stood out for me. So you talked about budget, the financial audit. I would imagine going through that process and just your size, which is on the, if you're not a unicorn already, you're certainly on that trajectory. You're probably more frugal than ever.
We're very frugal. Look,
which is weird.
Yeah,
which is weird.
I did not appreciate this when I started Shift, but the reality is that there are companies in Silicon Valley that are 99% gross margin businesses, right? Like whatever dollar they make as revenue is all profit because they're only software businesses and it's 100% scalable.
Yep.
I joke about this, like Plaid is one of those businesses, right? Like it's an amazing business if you can have it, and there's not a ton of them, but there's some of them. Our business is not like that. Like Shift will never have a 99% gross margin. Shift will never have 30% gross margin. It's just not possible because we are a very heavy operational business and there's a very high ticket item, but then you make some of that in commission and then you have costs against that. So we have to be very frugal because for operational businesses, burn is always higher when you're growing than for a software-only business, and there's not unlimited amount of money out there, right? And so we generally are frugal in capital. And have to be. And it's tough because you're competing against companies that don't feel the need to be frugal.
Right.
And that's difficult, and you got to figure out ways to kind of get around that. But ultimately, I think people who are really good aren't here just for the money. They're also here for the experience. And in some ways, I think we probably give them better experience. And then there's also this kind of opportunity, like most companies in most spaces in Silicon Valley are not going to go public, right? Like 99% of businesses built in Silicon Valley are to be sold to somebody else. That's almost the assumption you go into when you're building the business. Now, I'm not saying that, look, we might be acquired, who knows, right? I'm not disputing that at all. And if someone decides they want to do that, I'm, as a fiduciary, going to take that very, very seriously, and we'll talk about what to do and proceed, how to proceed. But we believe we have an opportunity to build a public company here. And so from that perspective, I think that's a really exciting for people to be a part of, right? Because that's not something you get to do often. And I'm also not a guy who's saying like, hey, I'm not going to go public forever. Like I don't need to be massive to do that. And so I think there's an opportunity to like monetize your equity here faster than in other places. So that also obviously motivates people to be here as well.
So, it remains to be seen, but IPO bootcamp, you guys are definitely in training mode for that. And
well, I mean, we are very honest about it. Like we want to be ready to go public in the next 24 months.
What does that mean how does work-life balance fit in that equation?
I have my own view on work-life balance, which is different from other people. So there are people who say, okay, when I'm on vacation, I have to be on vacation. I want to not, be online. To be perfectly honest, like Toby right now is at a retreat and he's literally completely plugged off. You can't get in touch with him. I have a phone number to a landline, and if it's like a crisis emergency, I can call him, but obviously I'm not going to do that. If you did that to me, I would lose my mind. Because for me, not knowing what's happening is like way worse than having to check email regularly. When I go on vacation, I actually like to work 3 or 4 hours a day because it allows me to relax, but at the same time, being plugged in and what's going on and know what's happening. So my kind of, when I had kids, we just had kids 5 months ago in September, I said to the team from the beginning, hey guys, I'm not going to be really taking paternity leave in the traditional sense of like, I'm going to be gone for X number of weeks, right? Like we offer 8 weeks or 7 or 8 weeks paternity leave per child born. So in my case, it was going to be like, 16 weeks of paternity leave or something. There's no way I could be gone for 16 weeks. This is not possible. And it was actually not going to be really helpful for me either because that was not something that my family needed. Now, there are families that might need that, but in my case, that was not necessary. We have plenty of childcare and support, et cetera, and we're fortunate to be able to do that. But what I wanted to do was to be able to actually be with my kids more than I would, had I continued on the schedule that I was on prior to them being born. So what we've done is adjusted my schedule, fairly in ways that took work. And that's been that now I actually come in a little bit later, and I am able to spend mornings from the time when they wake up until their first nap with them in a very kind of full on I'm there way. And then the same thing I not every day, but on certain days during the week I go home earlier, so I'm definitely there from the time when they wake up from the last nap until they go to sleep. And then also I used to never work from home, and now there are days when I actually do work from home because those are my paternity days, so I'm actually there more, right? So I'll also block out basically all the times when they're awake and to be with them more. I call that flexibility, and in some ways I think people weren't super happy when I said I'm not going to take paternity leave, but for me I've been able to bond with my kids better this way versus hey, I'm going to be gone for 3 or 4 months and be at home all the time. I think the thing that's been the hardest for me in the work-life balance has been the weekends. So I used to work, I'm very used to working a lot on weekends. and I kind of need to work on weekends because there's not enough time otherwise. And that's tougher to do with children because you feel like you want to spend more
How do you
time
sleep?
with
How do you
them.
sleep at night?
We're lucky. Again, I'm very fortunate, but we've had a night nurse, and she's training the kids, and so we actually sleep through the night. She doesn't even.
But normal sleeping patterns?
Oh, my sleeping patterns are terrible. Yeah, like I wake up a lot.
Yeah.
So it's the stress.
The entrepreneur bug.
but I need sleep too. So it's like
course.
we actually been like, in some ways, it's not just lucky. It's like incredible because when I had so many friends kind of go through the horrors of like waking up 3 times a night with kids, and like, we don't have to do that. Like that, I would not have been able to handle. Right? Like had I had to do that, then I don't think I could do my job.
After 31 years, I finally invested in a cognitive behavioral therapy sleep coach. And it sounded like this Kool-Aid bullshit. And I've had insomnia since I was 12, and I've done everything. And in 10 weeks, this guy has changed my life.
Wow.
It's fucking crazy. And a lot of it's hypnosis.
Interesting.
It's absolutely fascinating. I've done all of it: mindfulness, yoga, work out twice a day, like all of it. And there's nothing that can get me to shut off. So I'm now like
a big believer.
I'm the believer in
Interesting.
You have to invest in this. We're not, and I had the Aura ring. Aura gave me anxiety because
you're looking at it, you're not sleeping.
I'm going to get a bad sleep score. I'm going to sleep 5 hours, and then your day is shitty because you create this negative association with sleep scores. So you get 5 hours, you get 4 hours, you go, I'm going to have a horrible day. I'm going to feel like shit. So you do.
Yep.
So check out this book. I didn't write it, but it's called Power of When. And the first thing to do is going to give you a quiz, and Phil and I were talking about it on the way here. It literally is this like bespoke program for your chronotype. So it talks about when to eat certain meals, when to go to a therapist, when to have an executive coach, when to have sex, when to play with your kids. A full programming for everyone who's got different chronotypes. It's not enough to say like so-and-so should be eating a high protein breakfast. That might affect your sleep. So I think you're a dolphin like me. I don't know. You'll find out.
My issue is I actually fall asleep like super easily.
You wake up in the night.
And then like after about 4.5, 5 hours of sleep, I wake up.
Yeah.
And every other night I can't go to sleep.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird thing.
I'm gonna send you the link. Awesome. You just look at the program, and then you can start implementing a couple things. This has been awesome. I would love to have our listeners out there understand where to follow you. You mentioned you had a book that you published. I think we'd love to check that out.
Look, LinkedIn's good, Twitter is good. It's George Arison.
And the Shift mobile app and website,
Yeah,
correct?
so Shift.com is our company. You can go to Shift.com. Mobile is a very big part of our business because a lot of people search for cars, turns out, on mobile.
Yep.
We do have a mobile app as well, but most people who use Shift actually don't use the app. They use mobile.
The web mobile experience.
Yeah, because you're kind of on the fly, you're looking. But it's amazing because car buying is a very long process. Like people spend 3 months deciding what car to buy, and mobile in some ways is great for that because you're going from place A to place B, you're looking at cars. People love to do that. Yeah. And then there's a second part to car buying, which is like totally counterintuitive. Once people decide what they want to buy, they want to buy it like now, not like tomorrow, but like immediately.
So the psychology patterns are very different.
Yeah, it's just you would never think this, and for us it was totally counterintuitive. But like when you look at like our ability to fulfill the test drive when people want it, which is usually same day or at most next day, and if we are able to give it to them, conversions are like super high.
You got to be
if we push them an extra day, they go something. You're like, wow, dude, you spent 6 months deciding which car to buy. We can't wait for another day, but like, yeah, it's just this incredible thing.
And what markets are you available right now?
So we cover pretty much all of California. San Diego, Orange County, and LA, San Jose, San Francisco, East Bay, and then also Sacramento, and then we cover a large part of Oregon as well. Now you can buy a car sight unseen if you want to just have it be shipped to you anywhere. So you can go to shift.com from anywhere in the country and buy a car. And that's a reasonable amount of our purchases. About 15% of our buyers do that. But kind of the unique test drive brought to you offer, which is the big part of our business, and the differentiator is only available where we have operations, right? Because you have to like build an infrastructure to be able to do that.
Well, there you have it. I know most of you, especially from LinkedIn, you're definitely a millennial, which means you're probably a little lazy and you don't want to get up and go to the dealership, which means Shift is going to be the solution for you. They will come to you. They will handle all the headache of this process, and you make sure to check them out. This has been another episode of Rootstrap Radio. George, thanks so much for making the time and having an amazing team to host me, by the way. We've had a really, really good experience here. So congrats on all your success. And, if you need sleep, Coach, I know some people.
I'm looking forward to reading about this. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I need more sleep. It's a massive requirement.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool.